Good Monday morning, everybody. Welcome to week number 7 of the semester. Moving right along, we're getting close to the halfway point here, so that's good news. Um, this week we are working on a couple of things. One is industrial revolution, industrialism, and raising the question of whether it was a blessing or a curse. I cannot personally think of anything that has had a more lasting impact on the way we work and the way that we earn money and the relationships that we have with our employers than the Industrial Revolution. It came along, started really about the early 1800s, really cranked up during this Victorian period, because what had happened was our world, really, but mainly England, but also our world, got into a situation where we were moving from a rural agrarian society, and by agrarian I mean farmers basically, in a feudal society where you had big landowners and little farmers working under those landowners and paying them a certain percentage of their crops as taxes, which the landowners then answer to higher landowners and so on. We moved from that to a factory and consumer based culture. Especially during the Victorian period, consumerism became very important. And what I mean by consumerism is it was an economy that was driven by people making purchases. The more stuff people bought, the more stuff that needed to be manufactured, the more jobs that were created. This is still the culture which we live in today, here in the United States and all over the world. We live in a culture where everything depends upon whether or not a consumer will purchase whatever's being manufactured or purchase whatever services are being offered. This is all a result of the Industrial Revolution. Look at that, or read the chapter on that in your textbook. Also look at the slideshow I've got on that. And notice what factors really factored into the Industrial Revolution. What made the Industrial Revolution possible? And a lot of it had to do with the abundance of coal in England, the abundance of steel or iron in England. Excuse me. A lot of it had to do with the invention of the railroad. A lot of it had to do with the landowners dividing their land up among their sons, and all of a sudden they have smaller parcels of land. Then those divided up among sons, which made the parcels even smaller. So that essentially we ended up in an economy where most people only had one thing to offer in order to survive, and that was their labor. And oftentimes the men with money, who were the industrialists, paid very, very little for that labor. But the people accepted those working conditions because they had to. You're going to learn as you read this week's readings that children were involved very heavily in industrialism. The wheels of industry turned upon the hearts and the backs of the children. And that's really what Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poem is about. And so people became horrified when they started realizing what the children were being subjected to in order to help a capitalist make more money. And so child labor laws started getting passed. And then other work laws needed to be passed as well, because these capitalists would work people 6 days a week for 12 hours, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week with only Sundays off. And people started paying them very little while they were getting richer. And people started saying, hey, enough is enough. This is a debate that's still going on today. In fact, there's a presidential candidate named Bernie Sanders whose entire platform is on the relationship between those with money and those without it. The issues you're seeing being raised in the 2016 election are not new. History has replayed this fight over and over and over again. And you're going to see kind of the genesis of that in this week's lessons. Then we got the Brownings. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was already a famous poet before Robert Browning, who was an aspiring poet, met her. They fell in love. They had to elope because Elizabeth Barrett Browning's father was a very controlling man. Had to elope, got married. The father disowned her, but England loved the Brownings. In fact, Robert Browning's career really took off once he married Elizabeth Barrett Browning. So picture, if you will, some aspiring singer marrying Taylor Swift, and all of a sudden he becomes famous as well. That's kind of what happened with the Brownings. Throughout their lifetime, Robert Browning did eventually become just as famous as her because of his poetry. but they were the literary power couple, not only of England, but really of Europe during that time. So, with Elizabeth Barrett Browning, I have chosen for you to read Cry of the Children, which was inspired by the report you're going to read. So, you're going to read a report on child labor by the Child Labor Commission. And it's going to reveal some of the horrifying working conditions, particularly of the children who were doing the coal mining, and how horrible those working conditions were. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was inspired by the entire report to write her poem, Cry of the Children. So, that is an example of how art can change the world, because we think of poetry and think it's all cute and nice, and we don't, nobody pays much attention to poetry anymore, and so on and so forth. In Elizabeth Barrett Browning's case, Cry of the Children actually inspired Parliament to pass laws to protect these children. So sometimes art does have a major impact on the world. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that all you need to do is learn the STEM classes, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and that art has no place in the world. Art does have a place in the world, and Cry of the Children is a real live example of major change being brought on by a poem. The Robert Browning, you're going to read, I think it's just one poem by him. Yes, The Last Duchess. But what you're going to get is a dose of dramatic monologue. And you're going to want to pay attention to the Browning's slideshow to learn more about the dramatic monologue. But in Robert Browning's case, what the dramatic monologue is you get one side of a conversation. So bear in mind that you're only getting half a conversation as you read the My Last Duchess. And that is the words that a duke is saying to a marriage broker. So essentially what's happened is the duke is now a widower. He has a portrait of his first wife hanging in his art gallery. He's probably broke now, even though he has a 900-year-old name, which he's proud of. He's proud of his 900-year-old name. But he's broke now because he's spent lots and lots of money on artwork. So he needs kind of the dowry that comes with this woman. And essentially what he's telling this marriage broker is, hey, you tell that wife that I'm about to marry that she better not look at other men. She better not be too pleased by the gifts that other people give her. She's my wife. And so he's a bit of an egomaniac, not only because he has the name and because he wants to have the money and because he collects fine art, but also he's a bit abusive to his wives. And we kind of get the idea that this lady that's about to marry him is not going to be very happy. So remember what the dramatic monologue is, and take a look at the themes that play out in My Last Duchess. I believe you have 2 postings this week, so make sure that you get them both in on time. I will grade your remaining postings soon. I won't be commenting too much on them anymore. I'll just be sticking numbers on them. You should know by now if you're getting low scores why you're getting low scores. You do have that sample postings that a couple of your classmates allowed me to use to give to you. So, don't plagiarize them, obviously, but, use those as a guide. Oh, this is what this person did to get such a high score. Maybe I should do that in my posting, and strive to do that. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or feel free to call me on my office phone during my office hours, or if you happen to live in the Albany area or you come to some classes at Darton, do feel free to drop in. I've had a couple of students drop in and introduce themselves to me, and that always makes me happy. I like to be able to put a face to the name. So on that note, have a great week. I hope you learn a lot from studying the Industrial Revolution, and as you think about how it applies to the issues that are being raised in this upcoming election. And also, I hope that you enjoy the Brownings and their poetry.